Absolutely. Now, coming up on the 2018 session, you've been tapped as the new chair of the Education Committee in the
Correct.
Senate. And as an educator, what kind of skills are you going to bring to this role, and how are you going to approach this new role?
A lot of people would say congrats on this role. Sometimes I say it was maybe condolences, because it is a tough issue. Education is something that I think is a very nonpartisan issue because it affects our children, it affects our adults. We're lifelong learners. And so I'm really excited, though, about the opportunity to be the Senate chairman. I know I'm going to fill big shoes with Senator Mike Wilson and what he did before, but I do feel like being an educator, I can lean on a lot of my experience in the classroom. I've been at the undergraduate level. I now teach at the graduate level. I have been at the University of Kentucky. And I think, of having, those experiences, plus I'm a father of four. My children are students that have been both in private elementary school up to 5th grade, and then they transition to public school. And so I'm a public school graduate, and so I can see everyday issues that affect the entire spectrum of education. Plus, I got a wife who's a member of a site-based decision-making council. So, education is so important to our family as it is to every Kentuckian family that's out there. And so, I think by being in the classroom and listening to concerns and seeing that as a parent and as a father, I think it's something that's going to be, very, for me, the experience is going to fare very well for what I do.
Now, do you have any specific priorities you're going to bring to this new role, or anything that you and maybe House Education Chair Bam Carney have talked about, some shared priorities for 2018?
I will say it's nice having a Representative Carney as chairman in our home county. That means I don't have to travel a lot to meet with the other chairman for the House Education. So if we need to talk, we easily can text and we can meet up for coffee there in Campbellsville. But I'm going to lean heavily on Bam in his role, just because Bam has been in this for a few years. But he's a public school educator, and he's been in the system, and he knows how much education plays a role, and he hears from teachers daily on these issues. But I'm really looking forward to the priority-wise. It's the budget. I mean, if special session and pension reform is number one, don't get me wrong, but if we're looking into 2018, everything's going to be about the budget. And so these other bills that may be coming about, a lot of that stuff is secondary, because right now it's going to be focused on the pension. I know that's where, on the budget, and I know that's where our leadership team, is really focused as well on that. And not to say we're not going to look at other legislation, but I do think, when you're going into a situation that we're in right now with the budget, that's got to be priority number one for us.
Absolutely. Now, on the budget, there's been a lot of discussions about potential cuts, especially with the pension situation continuing to grow, even needing maybe even $1 billion more. So cuts are probably going to have to be a key part of this next budget. But K through 12 has usually been held harmless in these rounds of cuts. So do you expect that to be the same thing in this year, or do you expect some education funding issues?
That's our hope. I think that's always our hope when we go into any budget, is looking at that, especially when it comes to the SEEK formula, when it goes into K through 12 funding, is making sure that we don't have to harm that at all, because that is so important to the state. I mean, our children are the future, but we've got to make sure with education that we keep it harmless if at all possible. However, we do know that these are tough times, and they have been tough times over the past few years. This is my second budget going into, and I know what we did with the first one that I was a part of. This one as well. I mean, if you look at some of the other programs that are out there, Frisky program and different ones, those are things that we don't want to touch and don't want to harm. But at the same time, we've had to look at those. From 2008 to where we are now in 18, if you look at a lot of those programs, they've had to be, very much the large programs that I'm speaking to. Those have had to be really, analyzed and maybe scrutinized of are we getting the maximum out of those programs, and looking into those. But I do think in terms of, overall, if we can keep from it, that would be our hope and our goal to do so.
Now, K through 12 is usually held harmless, but higher education is usually, not. And as someone who works in higher education, you've seen some things that have happened since the last budget because of the cuts, and we've been hearing that it could be even worse this time. So what do you expect for higher education, and what does that mean for universities and even students if we do continue to see cuts?
I think a lot of that is what we've gone with the performance-based funding model that we passed last session under Senator Givens' leadership, and that's a truly remarkable piece of legislation that he got done. I don't think a lot of people realize how hard it is to corral all your university presidents together and to come up with an agreement. But anybody could at Senator Givens. Givens with his leadership on that. But I think that's going to be the testament going forward as we look at budgets and we look at priorities for higher education. But you're exactly right. I mean, we've got to, in terms of our public universities that are out there, they're going to have to tighten the belt, and they know that. I mean, they understand it completely, and I think you're seeing a couple of schools that have came out talking about freezing tuition currently where it's at. I think that's fantastic. I also think in terms of some of their promotion potential, I think many times we create the assistant to the assistant chancellor or dean. I think we have to be very careful of those things that we get into right there, of making sure it's not too top heavy with high level administration and focusing on the priorities of what needs to be done on college campuses. And so I think other schools have done some really good things in terms of energy on campuses, of trying to make sure that we're not spending so much and making sure it's cost effective. And I think we all realize that. And I commend a lot of our public universities and our colleges that are really tackling this issue and doing it in a very smart fiscal way.
Now, staying on education and the 2018 session, one of the number one priorities of the business community, the chamber in particular, is essential skills.
Right.
The business community continues to struggle to find people to fill the jobs who can show up to work on time, dress properly, shake hands. I mean, literally things that you would think are very simple tasks, they're not coming out with. So we have the essential skills bill moving through the legislature. It passed in the House last year. Do you think the Senate is going to take that up and pass that this year?
I commend the Senate for what they did is during the interim having us study the issue more, and I think that's a good thing for a lot of bills, and a lot of times big bills like that are heavy lifting bills. Last year, if you look at the historic run that we had in the Kentucky legislature of getting a lot of our priority bills out the door, and I think this is a priority bill, and I know the House has made it a priority bill, but I think it was smart that we really kind of looked the issue over, and it helped me as a new chairman of seeing what are districts doing. What are some things that are out there? Because I know it basically right now is a local control, but if it's a seal that we put on a diploma, if it's copying what some districts are doing, I think the approach that we're taking is very, very good with this. I think it will come down to our leadership of what they wish to do, but I've heard some very positive comments about it as well. But I think the approach that we did during the interim was the right approach to take on this. But I am looking forward to working with Representative Schell and working with the House on this issue, because it is. I mean, when we're seeing jobs that are not being filled, and when you're drug testing and all the things that could come about with this particular type of legislation, I think it's something that we must address going forward as a state.
Now, in terms of another funding problem, transportation is going to be a huge issue as well. You're the chair of the subcommittee on transportation. And we're going to continue to see issues with our infrastructure. The Chamber just released a report this year about infrastructure, and Kentucky is in a huge need for infrastructure funding across the board. So do you expect for that to be tackled, maybe with some changes to the gas tax or the formula in terms of revenue for funding roads and things like that? Do you expect there to be support for that kind of change?
I can't say yet about support for that, because I think overall if we're looking at tax reform, and I think that's also kind of the big elephant in the session that we're going into, I think we've got to be very smart on what we're looking to do with tax reform, but we also know that infrastructure is critical, especially in rural areas for a lot of the infrastructure out there. Not to say it's not in the urban areas, but I took the vote on the gas tax before, and I think that's a vote that I was able to defend on that, but I think we have to be very smart in terms of where we're looking to raise it, and how much is it going to be raised, and how much bang for our buck do we get if we do raise it, and by how much of a level that needs to be. I also was very supportive of our P3 legislation. I know the Chamber was behind. I think we're starting to see some fruits with that legislation as it's now being rolled out, and I think when it comes to infrastructure, that's one of the ways that we can do a lot of these projects is by using P3 models that are out there. I think this is going to work well over around I-69 around Western Kentucky, and so I think those are ways that also we can look to do things maybe without always having to say let's raise taxes for that, but let's maybe look at the public-private partnership model when it comes to that as well.